Thank my colleague from Arizona and my colleague from Kansas as well. Mr. President, I rise today in support of the Stop Targeting of Political Beliefs by the IRS Act. The bill introduced today by our senator from Arizona and the senior senator from Kansas. This is a Senate companion bill to the bill being marked up today in the House Ways and Means Committee. This is an important piece of legislation that will protect free speech and ensure, at least for the time being, that the Internal Revenue Service is not used as yet another political arm of this administration. As we all know, last November, the IRS unveiled proposed regulations that would fundamentally alter the nature of the activities that tax-exempt 501c4 organizations can engage in. Under current regulations, 501c4 organizations, or social welfare groups, can engage in political activities on a limited basis so long as their primary activity is the production and promotion of social welfare. However, they remain free to educate the public on important issues, even those that may be politically charged, because that falls within the exempt purpose of promoting social welfare. They can also conduct voter registration drives and distribute voter guides outlining candidates' priorities on issues important to the organization. Under the proposed regulation, virtually all of these activities would be considered political activities and would be considered inconsistent with various groups' exemptions under 501c4 of the Internal Revenue Code. As a practical matter, this would mean that grassroots organizations all over the country would be forced to shut down. Or to put it more bluntly, grassroots conservative organizations all over this country would be forced to shut down. And Mr. President, that's precisely the point. The Obama administration does not want grassroots organizations, even those that are legitimately nonpartisan, educating the public on issues of the day. They don't want tax-exempt organizations to be able to tell voters where candidates and politicians stand on the issues. And they certainly don't want these types of groups participating in the political process in any meaningful way. That's why we're seeing these regulations. That's why they were drafted in the first place. And that's why the administration seems set to finalize them right before the 2014 midterm elections, or at the very latest, before the 2016 presidential election. We need to call this what it is, Mr. President. This is an affront to free speech and the right of all American citizens to participate in the democratic process. This is an attempt by the Obama administration to further marginalize its critics and keep them on the sidelines. It is a blatant attempt to continue the harassment and intimidation that has already been taking place at the IRS over the past few years. This regulation is just one of many problems we see at the IRS. Indeed, the American people have ample reason to doubt the credibility of the IRS, particularly when it comes to dealing with organizations that might be critical of the president and his policies. The IRS is currently under investigation on 3 separate congressional committees for its targeting of conservative organizations during the run-up to the 2010 and 2012 elections. On top of that, the agency recently came under widespread condemnation when, in the midst of these ongoing investigations, they announced that they were reinstating bonuses that had been canceled in response to the targeting scandal. It's almost as if they believe there was no scandal at all. And the president tries to get people to believe that as well, and we all know that's pure bunk. Of course, if you've been listening to other people in the Obama administration, that type of thinking appears to be the predominant view. Several weeks ago, for example, leaks from the Justice Department indicated that no criminal charges were likely to be found in the targeting scandal, even though this scandal is still under investigation. Talk about politics, talk about political control, talk about ignoring what's going on. And on Super Bowl Sunday, President Obama said in an interview that there was not a, quote, smidgen, unquote, of corruption at the IRS. Well, Mr. President, when it comes to suppressing free speech, there's far more than a smidgen of corruption at the IRS. And if anything, these proposed regulations on 501c4s are additional proof. It's one side trying to one-up the other in all cases, because they happen to control the presidency and one house of Congress. When the proposed rule was first made public, the IRS said that it was drafted in response to the 2013 TIGTA report that revealed all the issues the agency was having with regard to 501c4 applications. However, as we learned in a Ways and Means Committee hearing last week, those regulations were under consideration for 2 years before the report was issued. 2 years. On top of that, the regulations were pursued outside of the normal channels for IRS and Treasury Department regulatory efforts in a manner that some IRS officials labeled, quote, off-plan, unquote. Off-plan in this case means hidden, H-I-D-D-E-N, from the public. Now, why does the IRS need to hide a draft regulation from the public when a regulation project is normally listed on a public Treasury guidance plan? I suppose we can only speculate, but I think it's fair to assume that they didn't want the public to know that these regulations were in the works. And they expect the American people to believe that there is no political motivation for these regulations. Give me a break. The fact of the matter is these proposed regulations demonstrate that the IRS is willing and able to carry the president's political water, even when the agency is, by law, supposed to be an independent and nonpartisan agency. That's why this legislation that has been introduced today by the two distinguished senators who preceded me in their remarks is so important. We need to send a message to the administration that it cannot tamper with the rules of free speech just because it doesn't like what's being said. If enacted, this legislation would delay the implementation for these rules for a year. This is the least we can do to protect free speech, Mr. President. People from all across the political spectrum, from the ACLU to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to the unions, have recognized just how egregious this proposed rule is. It needs to be stopped, and our bill would stop it. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation. Indeed, everyone who supports the right of American citizens to participate in the political process, whether they're Republican or Democrat, should support this bill. And I might just say to our new commissioner, who I fought to get confirmed, who I believe is sincere, who I believe is a person who can clean up this mess over there. This nest of partisan people who are in the IRS where there should not be any partisanship. Mr. Koskinen, I'll just say to Mr. Koskinen, you have the power to stop this regulation from becoming final. The commissioner should stop this. All he has to do is just not sign it. And I've got to say that I'll be watching very, very carefully because I'm sick and tired of the IRS being used for political purposes. I don't want it to be used for Republican purposes or Democrat purposes, for liberal purposes or conservative purposes. I want freedom in this country, and I want people to be able to express themselves freely. It's outrageous what they're trying to do. And it shows an administration that can't win fair and square with all of the advantages that it has. 501c4s are basically organizations that have a conservative tilt. 501c5s are the unions that we know almost 100% support Democrats, even though 40% of union members are Republicans. I know. I used to be a skilled tradesman. I learned a skilled trade, went through a formal apprenticeship, worked for 10 years in the building construction trade unions. I'm proud of that. I was proud to be a union member. 40% union members are Republicans, yet almost 100% of their effort goes to elect Democrats. By the way, the uptick in 501c5s was just as high as the uptick for conservative organizations and 501c4s. We didn't see any of this stuff being used against 501c5s. The only thing you can conclude is that there's a group of people who basically want to support only one side of the equation. We've got to get politics out of the IRS. I don't know what that means. It may mean, like other agencies where we don't want any politics involved, getting rid of any partisan controls. That might include the union. Because we got people that were partisan here, that did wrong things. Our investigation's not complete, but it is a matter of great concern to us. And then to come up with this type of stuff, it's enough to make you just want to cry. Or should I say, throw up. Look, I'm a Republican. Mr. President, you're a Democrat. We're friends. We don't agree on a lot of things. That's what makes this country great. But when one side tries to stifle the free speech of the other side, we both have to stand together. And I hope Mr. Koskinen, the new commissioner, will do what's right here and get rid of these regulations. My gosh, let's not have regulations that give a tilt to one side or the other. Let's have the IRS be down the middle, straightforward, decent and honest, which it has not been in the last number of years. And we're going to show that. All I can say is I commend my two colleagues for their leadership in bringing this bill to the floor. It's long overdue, and I hope that every senator in this Senate will support it. I yield the floor.